the issue of immigration laws in the country is back in the spotlight.
Fears of increased tensions between South Africans and foreign nationals working within the country. The EFF visited restaurants to check how many foreign nationals are working in the hospitality industry.
A lot of South Africans feel somehow marginalized by perhaps government's continuous ignorance or even choosing to ignore just how much undocumented illegal foreign nationals are working in South Africa. How then do we start navigating a very tricky and very precarious disposition?
This could spark perhaps unintended consequences between South Africans and foreign nationals.
Alexandra residents have been targeting shops owned by foreign nationals.
All undocumented illegal immigrants must move out of Alexandra, must move out of South Africa. That we are not backing down on.
Are we looking at the wrong place? Are we targeting each other as citizens where really the target as well as the focus should be centered on government, around government responding to a situation which was allowed to be created for decades?
This is the crisis that's affecting all of us.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our press conference, and to everyone who's joining us virtually and on all our social media platforms. My name is Malatsi. I'm the DA's Parliamentary Caucus Whip for Media. We are joined today by the DA's Head of Policy, Gwen Ngwenya. We're also joined by my colleagues from the DA Parliamentary Caucus, the Shadow Minister of Home Affairs, Adrian Roos. We're also joined by the Shadow Minister for Labour and Employment, Cardo. So this conference is very important because it will outline the DA's position on migration and xenophobia. It comes on the back of the successful Federal Council, which the party held last week on Monday, which is the highest decision-making body of the party that ratifies all policies of the organization. So how the proceedings will go on today is that Gwen, as the head of policy, will take us through the key outlines of the policy. Then both Adrian and Michael will take us through the relevant aspects relating to the two portfolios. We will then proceed to questions. If there are questions from the House, we'll start here with a series of questions, and then we'll also take questions virtually. All the normal protocols apply. When you ask questions, just introduce yourself, the media house you're coming from, and the question. So I'll now hand over to Gwen.
Thank you, Solly. Migration has often been an inflammatory subject in South Africa, where issues are couched in the language of fear instead of the enormous opportunity which the movement of people across the continent and across the world really affords. Migration, like other policy areas, including education, has many positive benefits, but of course it's not without its challenges. And it is important to take legitimate concerns seriously while at the same time addressing xenophobia. South Africa has struggled with incidences of xenophobic sentiment and related prejudice, violence and crime for many years. The cost of xenophobia is high. It puts lives in danger. It stunts economic potential by deterring investment, tourism and cross-border trade. And it also risks making South Africa a pariah on the African continent and on the global arena. However, it is critical to engage constructively. Demonizing genuine concerns and fears does risk entrenching negative sentiment and other defensive positions. So the task for any government is to really harness the potential of migration while taking seriously the anxieties of those who feel left behind. Now, this is what we have attempted to do in the policy. Last week, on the 28th of February, the DA's Federal Council met to consider 3 draft position papers. One of those papers was the party's position on migration. After deliberation, the position was approved. The full policy will be made available on the party's website in the coming weeks. The purpose of today, however, is to communicate on the key proposals adopted, and I will then hand over to Adrian Roos, who's the Deputy Shadow Minister of Home Affairs, and also to Dr. Michael Cardo, who is a Shadow Minister of Employment and Labour, to outline the issues, activism and legislation that we will push in the coming weeks and months that are related to migration, particularly in Parliament. The DA's opportunity-focused migration policy is anchored on 3 pillars. The first pillar is the opportunity created by the freer movement of people, and this would be enabled by safe, transparent and efficient borders, as well as the proper functioning of home affairs. This may sound like a paradox, but in fact, the freer movement of people does require well-functioning migration systems. Freedom of movement of persons would complement the African continental free trade area, which aims to enhance the free movement of goods and services across the continent. Fear-mongering politicians say that we need to do a better job of keeping people out, but focusing on opportunity would mean that we need to do a better job of enabling people to enter and remain legally. Therefore, this is what we propose on this first pillar. We propose implementing an advanced migration registry system to properly document all migrants when entering or leaving the country. This includes the taking of biometrics and other identification, together with the necessary alert mechanisms which are connected to both domestic and international institutions of safety and security, such as SAPS, Interpol and SARS. We would also limit human interaction between applicants and migration officials by ensuring that the bulk of applications, if not their entirety, are completed online. This would reduce the opportunity for soliciting bribes. It is also important to blacklist officials who have been found guilty of involvement in migration, corruption and fraud, and to prevent them from working for any other state agency or government department. Our proposals also include a hotline for whistleblowers who wish to report cases of fraud, corruption and malpractice. We need to promote and support the implementation of norms and standards with external governments to enforce South Africa's ability to deliver an efficient service. It is possible to enable verification in the workplace. We would explore the feasibility of an e-verification system that would enable employers to check the work eligibility status, of potential employees against a Home Affairs database. This would really empower employers to be able to check the status of their employees. We would also make it compulsory for employers to verify that a prospective employee possesses a valid permit to work in South Africa. This system should also really come with a self-check mechanism that also allows persons to check their own status and to resolve any discrepancies. In other countries, this kind of system has proven far more effective than the physical showing of papers. A critical proposal is to provide an amnesty period for all undocumented migrants, giving them an opportunity to either return to their home and attempt to re-enter legally without prejudice, or to apply for the relevant visa from within South Africa. The national government and South Africans already recognise the principle at play here. A good example is what is happening with driver's licences. There is currently a grace period for driver's licence renewals in recognition of the challenges motorists face and the inefficiencies, corruption and capacity problems at testing centres. You can multiply those problems by some order of magnitude when it comes to Home Affairs. So why should foreign nationals not be given amnesty when Home Affairs does not have its act together? Just like driver's licenses, a punitive approach risks lumping the innocent along with those who had no intention of following the rules. All urban refugee reception offices must also be opened and remain fully functional. We also have to increase the number of days asylum seekers have to apply for asylum to at least 14 working days after arrival. The current period is far too short to encourage compliance. The DA also continues to support the non-encampment approach with regards to refugees and asylum seekers. To address child statelessness in particular, we would remove the requirement for a South African citizen to witness the birth and to receive the notes of birth. We would also allow children to apply for naturalization at the age of 18, where they have no proof of birth registration. It is also critical that the Department of Home Affairs proactively work with the Department of Basic Education to address the large numbers of learners without birth registration through increased deployment of mobile units and opening of Home Affairs offices on Saturdays to accommodate school learners. On the matter of border security, we would ensure that the allocation of border security assesses the return on investment. This is important to balance the cost of physical and technological border security measures with interventions in the interior, which are often cheaper and might be more effective. No country can build an impenetrable wall, nor should it. So walls cannot take the place of migration systems. In addition, we would explore the return on investment of increasing the number of companies that are deployed along our land borders, as well as to explore the return on investment of maritime patrol, surveillance, and enforcing capabilities within the South African Navy. We would task units with repairing and maintaining border fences and also ensure border personnel are not only tasked with guarding the border, but assisting and redirecting all persons they encounter to legal entry points. Lastly, we would enter into various cooperative and shared responsibility border protection MOUs and protocols with neighboring countries and other international allies. So those take care of the elements on addressing documentation in our borders. The second pillar is the opportunity created by the economic participation of migrants. The language of fear that is often spread by reckless parties is that foreign migrants compete for public resources and jobs. The language of opportunity is supported by the weight of evidence, and it can help us to communicate that migrants in fact pay rent, they pay taxes, they transfer skills, know-how and knowledge, and they also employ South Africans, as well as purchasing goods and services which contribute to South Africa's revenue. Therefore, to further enhance the economic potential of migration, the DA would commit to introducing a trader's permit or visa for all African countries. Cross-border trade contributes to economic activity, and traders often buy goods to sell back home, or they bring unique goods and crafts that are not readily available in South Africa. While here, they pay rent and they purchase goods and services. Traders from outside South Africa rarely qualify for business permits, and they are often issued visitors' permits. These permits do not allow cross-border traders to participate in street trading in South Africa, so they are always at risk of arrest. More often, it leaves traders vulnerable to corrupt officials who try to solicit bribes. To attract the talent, skills, and experience South Africa needs, the DA would move to a points-based skilled migration system, as opposed to a skills demand system. A points-based system has proven to be more attractive to aspiring skilled migrants globally. Skills that fall into the South African critical skills list will carry points along with other criteria, such as qualifications, language spoken, work experience, etc. It is necessary to appoint a professional third party to administer the points-based system, ensuring that the progress administered is efficient and is done independently according to industry best practice. We would ensure the system is highly transparent to ensure the certainty and integrity of the system, thereby increasing the attractiveness for skilled migrants to apply. Our aim would be to have a turnaround time for the processing of applications of not more than 3 months. We would also offer permanent residency to high-scoring candidates who are exceptional in their endeavour, regardless of whether it falls within the critical skills list. It is essential to update the critical and scarce skills list based on transparent market intelligence and methodology. This is to ensure that it is easier for industries and individuals to motivate for the inclusion of a skill onto the critical skills list. We would also offer, importantly, automatic allocation of corporate visas for scarce skills as a percentage of the workforce to companies who operate in industries or sectors which experience widespread skill shortages. We would also simplify regulations to make the repatriation of remittances easier. as this particular intervention is significant for workers with dependents abroad. Some unscrupulous employers exploit the undocumented status of workers, and they rely on the fact that they will not be reported to the CCMA by workers who fear deportation. To address this, and this is only in part, we would ensure that legal status is not reported or investigated as part of any labour dispute process unless it is relevant to the case. This ensures that there are no barriers to foreign nationals accessing the same labour rights as South Africans in order to limit the arbitrage opportunity for exploitative employers. The final pillar of our opportunity-focused policy seeks to address the harmful myths that exist. The language of fear often communicates that foreign nationals increase crime, that they are an economic burden, and that they threaten our democracy. Inefficiency and corruption in the system make it extremely difficult for those foreign nationals genuinely attempting to gain legitimate documentation. The proliferation of businesses and criminal syndicates that prey on desperate undocumented migrants also contributes to the association between crime and undocumented migrants, even though many of these migrants may be legal work seekers, asylum seekers, or victims of trafficking and exploitative work circumstances. The Institute for Security Studies has found that the vast majority of violent crimes in South Africa are committed by South Africans and not by documented or undocumented migrants. Furthermore, our own parliamentary questions relating to this matter and requesting a breakdown of crimes by nationality show that there is no indication that there is a greater propensity to crime by foreign nationals compared to South Africans. That should put to bed the myth about foreign nationals and crime. On the economy, a 2018 joint study by the OECD and the ILO, the International Labour Organization, found that migrant labour contributes significantly to the South African economy and that it has a positive effect on the fiscal balance, in other words, through the payment of income tax and value-added tax that foreign migrants contribute. While there is a generalized fear of foreign nationals accessing social grants, occupying hospital beds, and government-subsidized housing, the more common reality, in fact, is that for most migrants, it is a life of hardship in accessing services. To compound the problem, most South Africans, such as bank staff, landlords, police officers, and municipal officials, have very little understanding of the migrant documents and what they mean. This leads to problems with the police, problems with access to banking, problems with access to social services, and difficulties with landlords and property agents who all expect a South African identity document for most transactions, while migrants often have other forms of legal documentation. Migrants without permanent residence, let alone undocumented migrants, do not have many avenues through which to access public services. To qualify for an RDP house, one must meet the National Housing Subsidy Scheme criteria. This means that applicants must be South African citizens. On healthcare, it is important to note that the South African healthcare system does not provide adequate healthcare services to anyone, South African or otherwise. Foreign nationals, however, often struggle to access healthcare at all, and this is a challenge that needs to be addressed not just as a humanitarian issue, but in its own right because migrants live among South Africans. It is difficult to achieve optimal community health outcomes by excluding some members of a community. This is true not only of the management of the COVID pandemic, but other health concerns too. So while legal certainty and consistency regarding the provision of healthcare is urgently required, the DA will advocate for the provision of emergency and primary healthcare services to migrants, including undocumented migrants, as a fundamental human right. This does not mean that all healthcare services should be free, but payment should be discussed after treatment for emergency and primary healthcare services. Furthermore, healthcare facilities should be safe spaces where legal status is not required to be disclosed. And this is supported by many health advocacy groups, including Médecins Sans Frontières. SASA grants are available to citizens and permanent residents only. And the data indicates that foreign-born migrant children represented just 0.3% of the child grants provided by the state. In comparison, as of 2019, some 18 million South Africans received some form of social assistance from the government. But we do realize that these facts alone will not change perceptions. Part of managing sentiment is ensuring that migration is managed in a manner that engenders confidence and trust. Ensuring that migration is integrated into a broader economic growth and development strategy, and that the positive economic and social outcomes of migration are regularly communicated is vital. Also vital is an intergovernmental coordination strategy to deal with claims of xenophobia and violence against foreign nationals before flashpoints transform into a humanitarian crisis. Another crucial set of interventions are those aimed at ensuring migrants are more efficiently and effectively integrated into South African society, both economically and socially. Migrants are our brothers and sisters. We cannot have a situation where we are fighting among each other due to a corrupt and incompetent Home Affairs. We need to make Home Affairs uncomfortable as it has made migrants and South Africans uncomfortable. Adrian will detail the various actions we will be taking to bring the fight to Home Affairs, which is where it really belongs. And I hand over to Adrian.
Great, thank you, Gwen, and I welcome everybody. So, as we address immigration issues in Parliament, I have to say that there's an overwhelming feeling of this complete lack of urgency from the Department of Home Affairs. So whether we're talking about how do we process visa applications of investors that want to come into South Africa, or whether we are talking about processing asylum applications and doing those speedily so that we can determine who has a legitimate claim and who should be deported, for example. There's just a complete lack of urgency. And I think, it's this leadership gap that is a big problem that the DA has been trying to address with Home Affairs on migration issues. And we look at what is happening in the absence of that leadership in our townships in the last few days. And the fact is that people are starting to feel they need to take things into their own hands and they need to take actions themselves. And, we have a national action plan, which was actually implemented and signed off by the Cabinet of the Republic of South Africa, which states that we should never go back to a point in time in this country where persons are categorized because of their color, creed, or nationality, where they are categorized and then they are separated into a group that is treated the same. And this is a big challenge, especially with terminology with the Department of Home Affairs, because we talk about foreigners, whereas there are a variety of foreigners. And, we're so focused now on how do we take the diminishing pie, the economic pie that is in South Africa, how are we going to split that up? How are we going to now create a quota for that? And we've seen loud and clear, I think we've had quotas in various forms for the last 20 years at least. Have they worked? Have they really created jobs? And so an immigration policy, it's really about creating jobs. And there's such a focus on the negative side of things. And this is why the DA has come out and said that we need a migration policy that focuses on the opportunity for all. And so the DA is really engaged in working on the whole thing of the process of processing visas for persons that want to invest in South Africa, that want to work here, the skills that we need, and also processing asylum applications. So to give you an example, it takes roughly 10 years from when somebody enters South Africa and says that I'm applying for asylum or refugee status. It takes roughly 10 years for them to go through the process and find out yes or no. And in the meantime, we have this situation of uncertainty. And so what the DA has done, we had this backlog at 68 years, so about 2 years ago. And through our pressure, we were able to reduce this. The United Nations, the UNHCR came on board, provided some lawyers, and we were able to drastically start reducing that time frame. But without the DA's intervention, nothing was going to happen there. And we see this in our refugee reception offices. So if we look at Durban, Pretoria, Messina, that is fine, but other refugee reception offices are closed. So for example, in Cape Town, it's taken almost 2 years since a court ordered to open the refugee reception office, and it still isn't open. So despite being court ordered, and there are excuses of contractor not being available and not having the money, etc., etc. But essentially there's a lack of will to say that persons that come in, present themselves and say that I'm a refugee or I have an asylum claim, are not being allowed to have that claim processed. And we should know, yes, is it a legitimate claim? No, is it not? And if it is not, then there should be a process that is followed. And so we need rule of law, we need action from our national government. So I, along with other colleagues, will be going to the various refugee reception offices that are still closed and talking to stakeholders about what the consequences are for these persons. And again, we've got to understand we are not in a continent where everybody experiences freedom, fairness, and opportunity. These are the foundation stones of the DA and diversity. So persons don't experience that. And we have a scenario where even the freedom of speech of these persons has been taken away with regulations, that they are not allowed to speak out against those governments. And so certainly this is something that we are going to take on in the strongest of terms, that these claims should be adjudicated speedily so that everybody knows if you are in South Africa, you've applied for something and you are here, you are either awaiting a decision and that is going to happen speedily. Now, I've touched on the items of the asylum seeker backlog. But I think another factor is, we've had, I think it's been in 4 of President Cyril Ramaphosa's State of the Nation speeches. We've heard about the e-visa system. So we've heard the e-visa system is coming since the very first one. And it's been addressed as a key priority to create jobs, to bring in investors, to bring in skilled persons, and to make that happen in a hurry. And it beggars belief that the Minister of Home Affairs has not been called to account for why years later this still hasn't happened. So there was an announcement towards the end of last year that these e-visa systems will be rolled out by March. And when we asked a question recently in Parliament about where we are with that, the answer was so vague that it's clear that they're actually not ready. And the key thing, as Gwen has pointed out, is that there are 2 aspects to an e-visa system. So the one aspect is the website that you can actually go on and do an application on. And then the other one is the central adjudication hub. And what such a system would do is it would separate the applicant from a person as much as possible. And this reduces the possibilities for corruption. So you wonder, why is it taking so long? And why is the minister not being held to account? But this is something the e-visa system absolutely has to be rolled out now. We've been decimated by the lockdown regulations, the draconian lockdown regulations. And we need people that can come here as tourists, as skilled investors. Now, I'll give you an example of, the fact that these visas are not being adjudicated fast enough, what the impact is. And there is something called the Global Retirement Index. And on that Global Retirement Index, there are countries like Panama and Ecuador, which are at the top of that list. And these are high net worth individuals that don't want to retire in a cold country. They want to go somewhere warm and lovely and tour around. So these people spend on average between 28 and 36,000 Rand a month. They buy a house for between 3.5 and 5 million. They spend money on all the maintenance of that. They have their own medical aid. And there is a whole industry around these persons. And yet in South Africa, you are forced to apply from outside the country and wait. And these people simply run out of patience and they go somewhere else, where they're allowed to come into the country temporarily while the application is being adjudicated, and then they come and stay here. And essentially you've lost someone that is living like a tourist and investing in a job-creating industry. Now, what we are presented with because of this is this false choice. And, this false choice says that attracting foreign investment, business and skills means that we're not putting South Africans first. But clearly it's exactly the opposite. And so the DA will be introducing a private members bill into Parliament for a skills-based a points-based migration system. And what this will do is try and attract high net worth individuals, persons that are skilled, that are able to bring in knowledge, that are able to create jobs and create opportunities. And we have South Africans that are desperate to work, desperate for an opportunity. And we need to match those people together. We need as many people in South Africa as possible, whether they're South African or wherever they were born, to create those opportunities. And so we believe this points-based migration system is going to be a great boost to our economy. And we're not the only ones. The World Economic Forum, in their research, has found that these points-based systems are far more effective in attracting skilled migrants than the current system that we have. In terms of the Border Management Authority, I think we've really having to come to terms with what is going on there. And the situation where we desperately need border patrols going up and down the borders to stop persons going around the border posts and direct them to our border posts. But instead, we are seeing the creation of a Border Management Authority, which is a home for millionaire managers. And then these millionaire managers are being appointed while the borders remain open. We're losing time. And so really what we are pushing for as the DA is for the government to say either Treasury must come and say that the Border Management Authority is fully funded, and it will be funded for the entire rollout. So this means the management structure and all of the support staff, or they must stop it and they must become a coordination agency, because that is what the socioeconomic impact assessment recommended for that bill. They recommended that that be a coordination agency, which is actually the DA's policy. Okay, so in summary, migration is really supposed to be a vehicle to create opportunities and jobs. And government research has shown that in Gauteng, for example, foreign-owned stores employ twice as many South Africans as South African-based stores. And so it's against this backdrop that I wish to hand over to my colleague, Michael Cardo, to discuss the labour issues around migration.
Thanks very much, Adrian. I think what we've seen in recent times is a scapegoating of foreign nationals who are essentially being blamed for South Africa's unemployment crisis. And politicians are fanning the flames of this phenomenon through populist campaigns like, for example, Operation Dudula. And the government itself now seems to have latched onto this with the recent publication just last week of its draft National Labour Migration Policy. And we as the DA reject this kind of very inward-looking, insular, chauvinistic, xenophobic bandwagoning. And the labour aspects of our migration policy steer away from the language of fear and, as Gwen has spoken about, focus more on the language of opportunity. We must remember that foreign nationals often help to oil the wheels of our economy. They pay rent and taxes, they transfer skills, they transfer know-how and knowledge, and they purchase goods and services which contribute to South Africa's revenue base. Foreign migrants are also often job creators. A 2018 study, which has been referenced earlier, conducted by the OECD and the International Labour Organization, found that migrant labourers often contribute significantly to the South African economy. They generally do not displace locally born workers. They can help to raise GDP by up to 5%. They can have a positive effect on the government's fiscal balance through the payment of income tax and value-added tax, and they are, more often than not, well integrated into the labour market, and they create additional employment. By contrast, what we've seen with the draft National Labour Migration Policy issued by the ANC is that it tends to posit foreign nationals as the other to be feared. And the document itself rests on two conceptual flaws. Firstly, it tends to suggest that foreign nationals are primarily responsible for South Africa's sky-high unemployment rate, which now sits, as you know, at 46.6% on the expanded definition. And this is a textbook piece of scapegoating, this impulse to deflect, to blame, to label, and to other. South Africans can't find jobs not because of foreign national workers. It's because the ANC has essentially run the economy into the ground through policy incoherence, through mismanagement, through corruption, through state capture, through big picture policy items which deter investors and sap economic growth. Our labour laws and our labour regulations, which are onerous and rigid, also have played and continue to play a significant role in our unemployment crisis. The other thing about this draft national labour migration policy is that the government seems to depart from the premise that there is a finite pie of job opportunities which need to be divvied up and parcelled out. And that's why the Minister of Employment and Labour signalled that he intends to slap quotas on the number of documented foreign nationals who can be employed in certain sectors like agriculture, construction, tourism, hospitality, and the like. And we as the DA regard this as a very short-sighted and xenophobic move. It reeks of populism, and it won't actually have a shred of impact on our unemployment crisis. We're misdiagnosing things here, and we're focusing on the wrong solutions. Now, the national labour migration policy also goes hand in hand with proposed amendments to the Employment Services Bill. And these proposed amendments would enable the Minister of Employment and Labour to set quotas per economic sector, occupational category, or geographical area. And we've seen this tendency in other pieces of legislation piloted through Parliament by the Minister of Employment and Labour, notably the Employment Equity Amendment Bill, which also introduces a quota system. But this particular manoeuvre in the Employment Services Bill will set a very dangerous precedent, because statutory employment quotas are a very regressive, draconian measure, and most likely unconstitutional too. They are redolent, really, of some of the most backward-looking regimes. If you look at history, what tends to happen in moments of national crisis, when the economy is floundering, is that the other is always looked for. You always look to blame somebody else. And unfortunately, what's happened in South Africa today is that foreign nationals have been identified as the other, blamed and scapegoated for our unemployment crisis, which has other causes. There are also mooted amendments to the Small Business Act aimed at preventing foreign nationals from establishing and operating small, medium, and micro enterprises, and from even trading in certain sectors of the economy. Again, this impulse is profoundly draconian and, quite frankly, preposterous. In short, legally entrenched quotas are a throwback to the dark past of apartheid and to the practice of job reservation. And that was actually dumped into the dustbin of history, job reservation, in 1979, long before our transition to democracy. As usual, what the national labour migration policy demonstrates is that the ANC is stuck in the past. We need to focus on the real causes of unemployment and not scapegoat foreigners. The cost of xenophobia is very high. It stunts economic potential by deterring investment, tourism, and cross-border trade, and it risks making South Africa a pariah in Africa and in the global arena. What we should be doing is looking to attract immigrants with critical skills and making it as easy as possible for them to come to South Africa, because there's a positive correlation between skilled immigration and economic growth. Thanks very much. I'm now going to hand back to Solly, who will field the questions.
Thanks, colleagues. Are there any questions from the House? While you think about them, I will go on the virtual platform and then come back to you. There are 3 questions that have already come up. The first one is, Gwen, can you tell us what this policy means for ordinary South Africans and how the DA will go about ensuring its implementation? That's the first one. The second one is that, given the current state of South Africa's economy, how will South Africa be able to afford these suggestions? For instance, regarding the hotline that you mentioned, what will happen to the complaints being reported? Will they be taken to the minister or the department, and how will you ensure that it's investigated and acted upon? And then the last one is that one of the single most important things that South Africa should do right now to harness the potential of migration instead of demonizing foreign nationals. So those are the 3 from the visual platform. Can we take yours, and then we can respond to all 4 of them?
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Liu from China Xinhua News Agency. Actually, my question is similar with the first one. So my question is, to what extent could DA implement your migration policy in where you govern, and what immediate actions you will take? Yeah, thank you very much.
Cool. Gwen, I'll now hand over to you to respond to those. If there are any of the questions you want to refer to both Mike and Adrian following your responses, you'll send them to them.
Thank you for your question. I mean, migration is obviously an inherently national issue because of the fact that it encompasses the Department of Home Affairs and also the other portfolio here with employment and labour. But of course, what we are able to do where we govern is to really drive awareness and apply pressure on the opening of those refugee reception offices. Most of those refugee reception offices are centred in metropolitan areas, and obviously that makes sense that most migrants, and including South Africans who are seeking opportunity, really coalesce in urban centres, and that's really in many places where there is either a DA government in place or a DA-led coalition. So our governments, where we govern locally and at the provincial level, are directly affected by the continued closure of refugee reception offices. And I know that in the Western Cape and also in Cape Town, and similarly others that could be opened, that we will be making sure that we push their reopening. One of the campaigns that we will be driving, which Adrian mentioned earlier, was really highlighting the impact of these closed refugee reception offices, and that we would be mobilizing outside refugee reception offices and centres, gathering stakeholders to really draw the attention back to the closed refugee reception offices. What we see some of the private organizations and quite frankly some vigilante groups that have arisen doing is taking the fight rather to foreign nationals, approaching foreign nationals, whereas really the place to take the fight is to Home Affairs and to the closed refugee reception offices. So that's one aspect of what we can do, but also there is a good measure of local law enforcement authorities in the metros where we govern, and it is really important that local law enforcement authorities work together with the SAPs to ensure that law enforcement and the proper authorities are the ones that do checks where they are necessary, and that we crack down on vigilantism and private operators or even political parties who've taken the opportunity to take it upon themselves to go around checking people for their documentation status. This is not the work of private citizens. And so certainly where we govern and where we have metro law enforcement, we will seek to ensure that this work is not continued by private vigilante groups, and that instead it becomes the proper work of law enforcement authorities and those mandated to do so. There were questions raised around the hotline and whether we in fact have the economic resources to implement some of these suggestions that have been raised. On the contrary, the economic resources that are needed would be a heavily anti-migration policy, which really requires a great deal of resources to enforce. One of the popular announcements by those who seek more crackdown measures against foreign nationals is obviously greater border security, including greater physical barriers. Whilst our policy did mention that we support, obviously, the safe and transparent and efficient functioning of borders, we also do really want to manage expectations and stress, as we did earlier, that no country in the world can possibly implement a border that cannot be penetrated. And so there are opportunity costs. At some point, you do have to weigh up the costs of further border security, further technology, etc., at the border versus internal management of migration, which is where we would place the bulk of the focus is on home affairs and making sure we have an effective migration system. What this means really to ordinary South Africans, should be transparent. Ordinary South Africans stand a great deal to benefit from migration opportunities. One aspect that perhaps wasn't really highlighted as much in the different presentations that we gave is also South Africans viewing themselves as migrants. Often South Africans view migration as something that happens to us as opposed to something that we are part of. We hope that by the kind of policies and stance that we are proposing, that this is part of, we are part of a global community that is slowly moving towards more transparent borders, more open and freer borders, but with effective management to ensure that South Africans also can harness opportunities abroad and opportunities in other African countries. So in many areas, South Africans will be the migrants. We are migrants when we seek out opportunity or to start business in neighboring African countries and abroad, etc. And so we hope to create a world in which that reciprocity is rewarded. I don't know if others would like to answer, or if there are any further questions, Solly.
Yes. Thank you for the question. I just wanted to also say that this is something that we've realised and we've raised it in Parliament, actually in late 2020 already, where we had a meeting with Home Affairs and with cooperative governance, because we realised that you need an intergovernmental approach to understanding the impact of what is going on. And the almost the instruction was given to the minister at that stage by the committee was to say, go and engage with the metropolitan municipalities, etc., and come up with arrangements where Home Affairs and the municipal forces and that could work together to preempt in any sort of flashpoints that might occur. The intelligence is on the ground, and nothing has happened in that regard. And that is certainly something that we continue to push and say, when is the minister going to do that? When is this? When is there going to be this focus on metropolitan areas as well? Because what we have noticed is that a number of the operations, so Home Affairs has operations with police, and that about 60 every quarter, but all of those are in remote areas, and they're not really in the areas of high economic activity, as Gwen was referring to. And so this is certainly something that we've pushed, and that is really our approach, that Home Affairs should lead that intergovernmental cooperation in how we proactively address these issues, look at challenge areas, and come up with solutions working together. Thank you.
Colleagues, are there any of you with no questions in the House? In the event of no questions, thanks very much for coming to this press briefing. The documents will obviously be uploaded on the DA's website, and if you need to engage with Gwen after this interview, you can send your request to both Bongisa and Debri. Their details were on the media alert that you responded to. So thanks everyone who joined us virtually for this briefing, and have a good day. Thank you.